this sumbitch. And Steven said, oh my God, well, I was thinking that too.
Few movie franchises have captured the thrill of adventure like Indiana Jones. From the snake-filled tombs of Raiders of the Lost Ark to the dark rituals of Temple of Doom, and from the father-son journey in The Last Crusade to the modern-day mysteries of the Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, the series has thrilled generations. But behind the scenes, there are secrets even die-hard fans never figured out until now. Did you know Harrison Ford filmed through dislocated joints and food poisoning? That Kate Capshaw nearly refused an entire snake scene, only to face thousands of real bugs instead? Are you also aware that the famous swordsman scene wasn't scripted but born from pure exhaustion and quick thinking? What about the fact that the Ark's supernatural sound came from a toilet lid, or that Ford and Sean Connery shot part of a Zeppelin scene without pants because of the heat? These are just a few of the incredible truths the cast and crew have revealed, and I bet you're not even ready for the jaw-dropping details that will be unveiled soon. They're stories that prove the adventures behind the camera were just as daring as the ones on screen. Ready to discover what really happened? Let's dig deeper. Live snakes galore.
Take this. Wave it at any.
Remember the moment when Indiana Jones and Marion Ravenwood drop into a chamber crawling with snakes in the Well of Souls sequence of Raiders of the Lost Ark? The filmmakers wanted to be more terrifying, authentic, and unforgettable than you've ever seen. The snakes weren't just a few rubber props or camera tricks. There were thousands of real snakes slithering across the set, making it one of the most challenging and nerve-wracking scenes in adventure movie history. The production began with about 2,000 to 3,000 snakes that local animal wranglers brought in for filming at Elstree Studios in England. But when director Steven Spielberg saw the first shots on camera, he immediately noticed the wide angles revealed too many empty patches on the ground. That means there weren't enough snakes to make the ancient tomb look convincingly alive. Spielberg turned to the animal team and said, "We need more snakes, a lot more snakes." According to producer Frank Marshall, they ended up gathering over 7,000 additional snakes, a logistical nightmare that took days to manage. They had cobras, pythons, vipers, and harmless non-venomous snakes all mixed. Despite the eerie atmosphere on set, it will amaze you to know that the actors were not as terrified as you thought. Karen Allen, who played Marion, recalled in an interview that she was absolutely horrified when she realized how many of the snakes were real. However, she went on to say, "I thought they'd all be fake." She laughed. "Then suddenly I'm standing in a pit with real cobras and pythons wriggling at my feet. I had to keep telling myself, it's just a movie, it's just a movie." Isn't it funny how she portrayed her role so well that you never knew she was at any point scared? Now, how did Harrison Ford feel about this whole snake saga? Crew members later said Ford didn't flinch even with snakes crawling over him, although he admitted he wasn't exactly comfortable either. Director Steven Spielberg later said, "We used every trick possible to keep our people safe, but those were real cobras, real venom, real danger." Snake wrangler David Tomblin also remembered a funny moment. "We ran out of snakes one morning because they all started escaping into the studio rafters. We had grips chasing them with buckets. This is indeed horrifying." There's no doubt that by the end of filming, the cast had developed a kind of strange tolerance for the creatures. Ford later joked, "By the last day, the snakes didn't bother me as much as the smell." Today, the Well of Souls scene remains one of the most talked about moments in Indiana Jones history. A last-minute fight simplification. The famous scene in Raiders of the Lost Ark, where Indiana Jones faces a black-clad swordsman in a crowded Tunisian market, has become one of the most beloved moments in movie history. The swordsman twirls his blade with flair, showing off his skill as the crowd gasps, only for Indy to pull out his revolver and shoot him dead with a single shot. What most fans never knew was that this entire scene was never supposed to happen that way. It was a spur-of-the-moment change born out of exhaustion, heat, and a bad case of food poisoning. Originally, the script called for an elaborate 3-day fight sequence between Indiana Jones and the skilled swordsman. It was meant to be a choreographed stunt, near misses, and moments of tension as the two fought through the bustling market. The stuntmen had trained for weeks, and Ford had spent time perfecting his whip moves. However, when the crew arrived on location in Tunisia to shoot the scene, things quickly went wrong. The North African heat was brutal, reaching well over 49 degrees Celsius. The cast and crew were falling ill from dehydration and local food contamination. Harrison Ford was hit particularly hard. Ford recalled years later, "We'd been shooting in that heat all day, I had a bad case of dysentery, and couldn't stay away from the bathroom for more than 10 minutes. I was in no shape for an extended fight scene." Director Steven Spielberg also felt the strain. He had fallen ill himself and wanted to wrap the outdoor shoot as quickly as possible. During a discussion on set, Ford approached Spielberg with a half-joking suggestion. "Why don't I just shoot the guy?" Spielberg laughed at first, but then realized it made perfect sense for the character. Indy wasn't a superhero. He was a pragmatic, tired archaeologist who preferred getting the job done over showing off. The idea instantly clicked. The long fight was scrapped, and they filmed the new version in just a few minutes. The result is one of the most iconic, unexpected moments in cinematic history. Terry Richards, the British stuntman who played the swordsman, later shared, "I trained for weeks with that sword, and then bang, it was over in one shot. But I loved it. It worked beautifully." Thus, what started as a problem ended up becoming one of the most memorable jokes in movie history. The iconic hat was deliberately aged. Indiana Jones's brown fedora is one of the most recognizable items in film history. However, what most people don't realize is that the hat that became a global icon didn't initially resemble its current form. It had to be beaten, scuffed, and reshaped until it looked like something a real-world explorer would wear through jungles, deserts, and ancient tombs. Costume designer Deborah Nadoolman Landis, who worked closely with director Steven Spielberg and producer George Lucas, knew that Indiana Jones couldn't look like a polished movie hero. He needed to look rugged and believable. She once explained, "I wanted his clothes to look like he'd been sleeping in them for days, fighting off bandits, rolling in dirt, and then getting up for breakfast." When the first version of the fedora arrived from the hat maker Herbert Johnson of London, it looked far too new and perfect. Nadoolman and her team immediately went to work breaking it in. They crushed it, rolled it up, rubbed it with sandpaper, and even sat on it to create wrinkles and soft edges. Every dent and smudge was placed deliberately to make it seem as though Indy had worn it for years. The same treatment was given to Ford's leather jacket. Instead of a shiny, brand-new look, they aged it with oil, dirt, and paint to simulate years of wear and tear. Ford recalled laughing when he saw Nadoolman scuffing the jacket herself. "She was rubbing it on the ground, stepping on it, then she threw it to me and said, 'Now you look like you've actually been somewhere.'" The final look became the signature image of Indiana Jones. The filmmakers took special care to maintain consistency from scene to scene. Casting near misses. Before Harrison Ford became the face of Indiana Jones, another actor almost took the role, and for a while, it looked like the studio had already made up its mind. In one of the most surprising behind-the-scenes stories from Raiders of the Lost Ark, actor Tom Selleck was initially chosen to play Indiana Jones, not Ford. The television star had just landed the lead role in Magnum P.I., and at the time, both Steven Spielberg and George Lucas thought he was perfect for their daring archaeologist. Spielberg later admitted, "Tom had that rugged charm, that twinkle in his eye. He could play serious and funny at the same time." Selleck even did full costume tests, complete with the fedora, whip, and leather jacket. Photographs from that test still circulate among fans today, showing just how close he came to being the man in the hat. But fate had other plans. Selleck was under contract with CBS for Magnum P.I., which was about to start production. The network refused to release him for the movie, fearing he might abandon the show. Selleck later explained in an interview, "It broke my heart. I loved the script, and I desperately wanted that part, but I was already tied to Magnum. That's the business." Ironically, a Hollywood actors' strike delayed Magnum P.I. for several months, meaning Selleck could have filmed Raiders after all. But by then, the role had already gone to Harrison Ford. When Ford read for the part, everyone in the room knew they'd found their Indy. Spielberg said, "Once Harrison put on the hat, it was over. The charm, the toughness, the humor, it was all there. We got lucky. We ended up with the right man for the job." But Tom Selleck wasn't the only almost star. For the role of Salah, Indy's loyal Egyptian friend, Danny DeVito was the first choice. But unfortunately, DeVito was busy filming the TV show Taxi and had to decline the offer. The role then went to John Rhys Davies, who brought depth and gravitas to Salah. Rhys Davies later said, "I'm glad Danny couldn't do it because I got one of the greatest roles of my career." In retrospect, these near misses in casting show just how fragile movie history can be. A few scheduling changes or different studio decisions, and Indiana Jones might have looked entirely different. Boulder set was massive and heavy. The opening sequence of Raiders of the Lost Ark is one of the most unforgettable in cinema history. For decades, audiences have assumed that the boulder was just a clever special effect or a miniature, but in truth, it was a real, full-sized prop built from fiberglass, and it was dangerously heavy. The giant sphere measured about 22 feet in diameter and weighed close to 500 pounds, which was light enough to roll smoothly but heavy enough to crush anything in its path if it went off course. Production designer Norman Reynolds and his team constructed the boulder out of fiberglass, featuring an internal frame that provided stability. It was carefully balanced on a long ramp built into the set, which was constructed at Elstree Studios in England. Reynolds explained in an interview, "We had to make sure it looked heavy, but rolled smoothly enough not to kill our leading man." During filming, Spielberg wanted the boulder to chase Ford down a 40-foot-long tunnel lined with fake stone walls. Ford performed the stunt himself for all 10 takes, sprinting as the Tunisian sphere thundered behind him. Each time, Spielberg shouted, "Run faster!" from behind the camera. Ford later recalled with a laugh, "That thing was coming at me faster than I expected." Steven kept saying, "It's safe, it's fiberglass." But 500 pounds of anything rolling downhill doesn't feel safe when you're in front of it. Ford's timing had to be perfect. He had to leap and roll out of the tunnel at precisely the right moment to avoid getting hit. On one take, he misjudged the timing by a second, and the boulder grazed his back. Ford said in an interview years later, "That was real fear you see on my face. It wasn't acting. I was running for my life." The boulder became a permanent part of Indiana Jones's legend. Improvised plane fight scene. The brutal and unforgettable airfield fight scene in Raiders of the Lost Ark, where Indiana Jones battles a towering Nazi mechanic beside a spinning airplane, is one of the most intense sequences in the film. Yet few realize that director Steven Spielberg improvised this entire scene on the spot. Initially, the sequence was planned to be a large-scale, complex set piece with multiple vehicles, soldiers, and an extended chase. Spielberg, however, realized that it would have been too time-consuming and expensive to shoot, and the Tunisian heat wasn't making things any easier. So he decided to improvise a simpler, tighter version of the fight. He later joked, "I had to come up with something fast because the crew was melting." The scene takes place at a secret Nazi airstrip, where Indy attempts to hijack a prototype flying wing to prevent it from being used to transport the Ark. He's confronted by a massive bald mechanic who towers over him. What follows is a brutal hand-to-hand fight filled with punches, grit, and tension, made even more dangerous by the roaring airplane engines and spinning propellers in the background. Spielberg choreographed the action on the spot, adjusting moves and camera angles as they went. He later admitted, "I didn't have a clear plan. I knew there would be punches. I knew someone would get killed by the propeller, but how we got there was something we figured out minute by minute." But the surprises didn't stop there. During filming, the pilot inside the airplane was meant to be played by a stunt performer, but the stunt team was ill that day. So, in a classic Hollywood moment, producer Frank Marshall donned the pilot's uniform and took the seat himself. Marshall laughed later, "I got drafted. It was supposed to be a quick background shot, but then the plane exploded and I realized maybe I should have asked for hazard pay." Adding to the improvisation, Ford accidentally injured his knee while crawling under the plane. Instead of halting production, he continued filming, visibly limping through the rest of the sequence, which only made Indy's struggle look more authentic. Thus, what was supposed to be a quick, improvised fight became a defining moment of Raiders of the Lost Ark. Actor injury on set. The Raiders of the Lost Ark airfield fight sequence was already grueling. Still, for Harrison Ford, it became even more punishing when a terrifying real-life accident occurred that could have ended not only the scene but possibly his acting career. During the filming of the intense plane fight scene, Ford was supposed to roll beneath the spinning airplane to escape being crushed narrowly. The aircraft, which was a full-sized prop model built to resemble a Nazi flying wing, was mounted on hidden rails so it could move slowly along a circular path during the fight. However, even with the safety setup in place, the stunt proved to be dangerous. As Ford maneuvered beneath the plane to perform his next move, the heavy wheel rolled directly over his knee, resulting in a torn anterior cruciate ligament, ACL. The pain was immediate and severe. Crew members rushed in, and for a brief moment, shooting stopped. According to Ford, in a later interview, "I felt it pop. I knew something had gone wrong, but I didn't want to stop." We'd come so far with that scene miraculously. Despite the injury, Ford refused to halt production. With basic first aid and a makeshift wrap applied to stabilize his knee, he got back up and continued filming. He performed several more shots. Director Steven Spielberg later praised Ford's grit, saying, "He didn't complain. He just said, 'Let's finish it.'" I've worked with a lot of actors, but nobody pushes through pain like Harrison. Even Vic Armstrong, who was the stunt coordinator who doubled for Ford in dangerous moments, was shocked by the actor's decision. He said, "Most stars would have called it a day, but Harrison, he taped his knee and carried on like Indiana Jones himself." After filming wrapped for the day, Ford was taken to a local medical facility. The diagnosis confirmed a torn ACL, an injury that usually requires surgery and months of recovery. But Ford skipped surgery entirely and continued shooting for the remainder of the film with only a knee brace and occasional pain relief. He later admitted, "It hurt like hell, but I didn't want to lose the rhythm of the performance." In retrospect, the accident became one of the defining examples of Ford's legendary dedication as an action star. Karen Allen influenced her character's actions. When audiences first met Marion Ravenwood in Raiders of the Lost Ark, she wasn't the typical damsel in distress. She was tough, witty, and unafraid to throw a punch or a frying pan. But what many fans never realized is that Karen Allen, the actress who portrayed her, was primarily responsible for shaping Marion into that fiery, resourceful woman who could take care of herself without Indiana Jones. Initially, the early versions of the Raiders script painted Marion as someone brave, but ultimately in need of rescue. Karen, however, wasn't satisfied with that. Having a strong background in theater and a passion for well-rounded female roles, she approached director Steven Spielberg and co-writer Lawrence Kasdan to talk about how she imagined Marion. Karen said in a 2008 Empire magazine interview, "I didn't want her just to be the girl who screamed and waited for Indy to save her. I thought she'd be someone who had learned to take care of herself. Someone who could fight back, who could drink anyone under the table, and who wasn't afraid of a little danger." Spielberg loved the idea. Together, they began reshaping scenes to highlight Marion's independence and quick thinking. One of Karen's favorite moments that emerged from those discussions was the Nepal bar scene, where Marion fights back against the Nazis invading her tavern. The iconic moment where she grabs a frying pan and knocks out an attacker was Allen's suggestion during rehearsals. She recalled, "We were running through the scene and I just instinctively reached for a frying pan." Steven laughed and said, "Perfect, keep it." That single addition became a defining moment for her character. The impact of Karen's input carried her into later films. When she reprised her role in Indiana Jones and the Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, Spielberg and Ford both noted that Allen's strength and energy were what made Marion's return feel right. Looking back, Karen Allen remains proud of what she brought to the character of Marion Ravenwood. No pants scene aboard Zeppelin. The father-son moment where Indiana Jones and his father, Professor Henry Jones Sr., played by Sean Connery, share a rare heart-to-heart conversation aboard Zeppelin has to be one of the outstanding scenes in Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade. But behind the camera, both actors were filming the scene without their pants on. Curious to know why? Here's your answer. That decision was not intentional but born out of pure necessity. The Zeppelin interior was lit by powerful film lights, which made the space unbearably hot. According to both Ford and Connery, the temperature inside the cabin soared to nearly 43 degrees Celsius under the heavy lighting. Then, the heavy costumes worn by the characters made the discomfort even more overwhelming. During one take, Connery finally had enough. He reportedly said, "I'm taking off my bloody trousers before I melt in here." Ford, not one to miss a beat, followed suit, and soon both actors were sitting comfortably behind the table wearing only shirts, ties, and boxers below the waist. Cinematographer Douglas Slocum and director Steven Spielberg couldn't help but laugh, but they went along with it since the camera only framed them from the waist up. Ford later recalled in an interview, "It was so hot you couldn't breathe properly, so Sean and I decided to take our pants off. We shot that whole serious father-son scene in our underwear." Everyone on set struggled to keep a straight face as the pair delivered heartfelt dialogue about family, legacy, and misunderstanding, all while trying to stay cool. What's remarkable is how natural and relaxed the scene feels in the final film. The authenticity of their banter helped make the Joneses feel like a real family. Live bugs for real effect. One of the most memorable scenes in Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom is when Willie Scott, played by Kate Capshaw, finds herself trapped in a narrow, dark chamber filled with hundreds of live insects. The moment she screams and shudders while covered in crawling centipedes, beetles, and roaches wasn't movie magic. It was very, very real. Unlike many modern films that use visual effects or rubber replicas, director Steven Spielberg insisted on using actual live bugs to achieve authentic reactions from the actors. The result was one of the most unsettling yet unforgettable sequences in the entire Indiana Jones franchise. Kate Capshaw, however, wasn't exactly thrilled about it. During several interviews over the years, she has openly admitted to being terrified of insects, and that the bug chamber scene was one of the most challenging things she had ever done as an actress. She later said in a 2014 interview, "I screamed for real. There was no acting required. Every sound I made was genuine fear." Before filming, Capshaw reportedly had to take a mild tranquilizer to calm her nerves. Spielberg himself confirmed this in the DVD commentary, saying, "Kate was genuinely terrified. She took a small relaxant just to be able to go through with it. Even then, it took all her courage to get into that tunnel." Capshaw also wore a special protective layer under her costume, though it didn't help much. Incredibly, Capshaw endured it all for the sake of the film. Spielberg later praised her professionalism, calling her one of the bravest people on set. Ironically, it was during the making of Temple of Doom that Spielberg and Capshaw began their real-life romance, and they later married in 1991. Capshaw joked years later, "It's funny, I fell in love while covered in bugs." The realism paid off. The sequence remains one of the most talked about moments in the Indiana Jones series. Stunt dummies for the drawbridge collapse. The bridge collapse sequence in Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom stands as one of the most daring and heart-pounding moments in the entire Indiana Jones saga. Suspended high above a crocodile-infested gorge, Indiana Jones cuts through the ropes of a rickety bridge, sending dozens of thuggy cultists plunging to their doom. The scene is pure adrenaline, but what most fans don't know is that many of those screaming cultists weren't stuntmen at all. They were specially designed life-size stunt dummies with remarkably lifelike movements. In the early 1980s, before CGI became a viable option, directors like Steven Spielberg had to rely on practical effects and clever illusions to create large-scale action sequences. The Temple of Doom team found it hard to figure out how to make it look like dozens of men were falling hundreds of feet into the gorge without actually risking the lives of real stunt performers. The solution came in the form of industrial design, where the production team constructed about 40 to 50 full-size dummies, each one meticulously crafted to resemble the thuggy cultists. Special effects coordinator George Gibbs explained in a behind-the-scenes interview, We couldn't possibly throw that many stuntmen off a bridge, so we built dummies that could move. We fitted them with little motors and weighted joints so their legs would kick as they dropped. It gave the illusion of real people struggling in free fall. The bridge itself was built across a deep gorge in Sri Lanka. Spielberg wanted the bridge to be functional, so the crew designed it with real rope and wood, stretching about 100 feet long and hanging 200 feet above the riverbed. To enhance the realism, sound editors later added shrieks, impacts, and echoes, making the dummy drops feel visceral and chaotic. Spielberg reportedly burst out laughing when he first saw the playback, saying, "They look better than some of our extras." Harrison Ford and stuntman Vic Armstrong, who doubled for him in the sequence, actually performed several shots on the real bridge, dangling against the sky as it split in half. Ford later said, "It was one of the scariest things I've ever done on film. When that bridge went, you felt it in your stomach. Even though you knew it was safe, it didn't feel that way." In retrospect, the bridge collapse remains one of the most iconic moments in the Indiana Jones series. Harrison Ford's back injury. During the grueling production of Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom, Harrison Ford once again proved that playing the world's most adventurous archaeologist came with real-world danger. In one of the film's many intense fight scenes, Ford suffered a serious back injury that nearly derailed the entire shoot and required an experimental surgery involving an enzyme extracted from papayas. Will this work or not? Let's find out. The incident occurred while filming the slave mining sequences inside the underground Temple of Doom. These scenes demanded physically punishing action like long hours of running, fighting, and performing heavy stunts on uneven rock like surfaces surrounded by fire, smoke, and machinery. During one particular take, Ford was performing a fight scene that involved lifting and twisting motions when he suddenly felt a sharp, stabbing pain shoot through his lower back. At first, he thought it was just a muscle strain, but over the next few days, the pain worsened to the point that he could barely move. Production medics called in specialists, and after an examination, Ford was diagnosed with a herniated disc. With this serious spinal injury, one of the discs in the spine ruptures and presses on nerves, causing intense pain and limited mobility. Ford later recalled in interviews, "I could hardly stand up straight. Every time I tried to move, it felt like someone was jabbing me in the back with a hot knife." The situation quickly escalated. Ford's injury made it impossible for him to continue performing the demanding stunts and choreography the film required. Spielberg had to pause filming for several weeks so Ford could seek treatment in Los Angeles. Instead of undergoing traditional surgery, which would have meant months of recovery, Ford was introduced to an experimental enzyme-based treatment developed by a Japanese doctor. The therapy involved injecting a papaya-derived enzyme called chymopapane into the herniated disc to dissolve the protruding tissue and relieve pressure on the nerves. The procedure was risky and relatively new at the time, but Ford decided to proceed. Miraculously, it worked. Within 6 weeks, Ford's pain had subsided and he was cleared to return to the set. Spielberg described it as one of the fastest recoveries I've ever seen. When Ford returned to the set, his dedication impressed everyone. Despite lingering discomfort, he insisted on finishing the film's most dangerous stunts himself. Inspiration for Han Solo's sidekick.
Thanks for helping me get out of there.
One interesting fact about the whole Indiana Jones franchise is that the name Indiana, the iconic archaeologist, and even the character of Chewbacca, Han Solo's loyal Wookiee co-pilot, were all inspired by George Lucas's real-life Alaskan Malamute. This dog helped shape two of cinema's most beloved franchises. George Lucas, who wrote the entire Indiana Jones franchise and Star Wars, found it necessary to imprint his life story in the movies. Lucas's Malamute, named Indiana, was a large, affectionate, and shaggy companion who often rode in the passenger seat of Lucas's car when he was writing scripts in the 1970s. Lucas once said in an interview, "He'd sit right next to me, almost like a co-pilot. He was big, hairy, and always watching over me." That's where Chewbacca came from. I wanted Han Solo to have that kind of relationship with his sidekick. When Lucas teamed up with Steven Spielberg to create Raiders of the Lost Ark, they spent months brainstorming the perfect name for their new hero, a rugged archaeologist with the swagger of an old serial adventurer. Lucas suggested the name Indiana in honor of his dog. Spielberg loved the sound of it. The line delighted fans who knew the story, adding another layer of humor and authenticity to the father-son dynamic. Lucas's bond with his Malamute was so influential that it became a quiet symbol of companionship in his storytelling. Sound effects by unconventional means. Few people realize that one of the most defining features of the Indiana Jones films came from the imagination and creativity of legendary sound designer Ben Burtt, the same genius who gave Star Wars its unforgettable sound palette. Burtt was known for believing that the best sound effects often came from the real world rather than electronic synthesis. He once explained, "I wanted audiences to feel the sounds. When Indy punches someone, it shouldn't sound polite. It should sound like an explosion of muscle and momentum." That philosophy led him to experiment with everything from vegetables to toilets, building a soundscape so vivid that it remains iconic to this day. One of his most ingenious creations was the sound of the Ark of the Covenant being opened. To achieve the heavy lid sliding off the ancient chest, Burtt used the lid of a household toilet tank. He discovered that sliding it slowly across the porcelain rim produced an eerie, resonant scrape. When layered with reverb and slowed playback, it became the now famous arc-opening sound effect. The snake pit sequence in The Well of Souls provided another creative challenge. The filmmakers needed the unsettling, slithering hiss of hundreds of serpents, but the snakes are notoriously quiet. So Burtt stuck his fingers into a cheese casserole and began squelching and sliding his hands through the goo. When mixed and looped at different pitches, it perfectly mimicked the slimy, shifting movement of snakes crawling across stone. Burtt's quirky DIY approach to sound design was about storytelling. Each sound effect, no matter how strange its origin, was crafted to immerse the audience deeper into Indy's world. In later interviews, Burtt laughed about his odd techniques. "If you'd walked into my kitchen during Raiders, you would have thought I'd lost my mind. There I was, sticking my hands into casseroles, slamming jackets, and dragging toilet lids around. But when it all came together, it worked." It sounded like an adventure. Kate Capshaw refused a dangerous snake scene.
She wasn't bitten. She was terrified all through the movie because of the snake. She hated snakes as did everybody else.
When Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom was being filmed, actress Kate Capshaw, who played the glamorous nightclub singer Willie Scott, faced one of her biggest fears: snakes. Capshaw revealed years later that during the filming of Temple of Doom, the production team had planned a particularly intense scene involving a large live python that would slither dangerously close to her character. In interviews, Capshaw admitted that she had an almost phobic fear of snakes, a fear that made the mere suggestion of performing with one unbearable. When director Steven Spielberg explained the shot and the need for authenticity, Capshaw became visibly distressed. Spielberg, ever the understanding director, decided not to push her. He reportedly told Capshaw that she could skip the snake scene if she agreed to perform one that involved real live bugs crawling all over her. That trade led to the horrifying bug chamber scene, where Willie Scott is trapped in a tunnel filled with thousands of wriggling insects. Spielberg later said during a behind-the-scenes interview, "Kate got out of the snake scene, but she ended up in one of the most disgusting scenes I've ever filmed." The experience actually strengthened the bond between Spielberg and Capshaw. He admired her courage and humor under pressure. The decision to skip the snake sequence might seem minor, but it became a small yet telling chapter in Indiana Jones's history. Which of these facts is the most thrilling to you? Share with us in the comments and subscribe to our YouTube channel. Hit the like button and share this video with your friend before you leave.